George is actually the chair for the California IPv6 Task Force and has been the chair now for, how many years?
About 3 years.
Yeah, about 3 years. So George and I are cohorts in crime on the California IPv6 Task Force, and George is going to be kicking us off with the introductions and then you're going to be doing the introduction for the keynote too, right? Oh, all right. Well, yeah, I'll let you do it anyway. But with that, I'll go ahead and turn it to George and get us going.
All right, good morning to all dozen of you this morning. Welcome. As Ed had mentioned, I am chair of the California IPv6 Task Force. And the task force is a not-for-profit organization, and we're devoted to the use and deployment of V6. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the task force. Some of you may have heard of us. I know a lot of you that have been in the industry for a while. Those of you who know me, as well as some of the folks that have participated in the task force, know that we've had a bit of a disparate past. So we've been active, we've been not active, that sort of a thing. So we're going to kind of cover a little bit of some of the things that have occurred with the task force, to include history, what our mission and goals are today, as well as our accomplishments and membership. So first, I'd like to thank everyone for being here, and more importantly, like to thank Ed for putting this event together, and Bruce for organizing the event as well. Ed plays a very big part, plays a very big role for the task force down here in the Bay Area. For those of you who don't know me, I'm actually from Sacramento, so I spend a lot of time with our government, the state of California, advocating IPv6, along with a number of vendors that have shops up there. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of those accomplishments as well. And we'll get into what membership means and how to become a member. CAv6TF, just the baseline, California IPv6 Task Force, North American IPv6 Task Force. The CAv6TF and NAv6TF they were founded in July 2004, or the CAv6TF was founded in July 2004 by Jim Bound and Jeff Lambert. Jeff is the chairman of the original chairman of the task force, and has taken an emeritus status, and now he is actually on the East Coast, living back in Pennsylvania. For those of you who may have known Jeff, you can still see him emailing from time to time, back and forth on NAv6TF related matters. And what the California Task Force does is we work with other task forces that are organized, and please take organized very loosely here, under the North American IPv6 Task Force. Each entity is operating autonomously under the auspices of what was essentially the North American IPv6 Task Force and what it was founded for. And the original mission was focused on advocacy, adoption, and deployment planning, when we rolled out in 2004 for California, whereas NAv6TF and, of course, the IPv6 Forum, which I'm sure some of you are aware of, the IPv6 Forum, is also driving some of the things that we do as well. Excuse me. So our new mission moving forward is essentially devoted to IPv6 use and deployment through advocacy, education, certification, and deployment resources. So those are the four things that we're focused on with the task force now. A little bit more organized of a vision and where we're headed. And I'm going to break that down into a little bit more detail here as I go over each of the goals, which are related, of course, to the mission. So starting with advocacy. So advocating IPv6, the members that are active today, that are volunteers who understand the fundamental importance of IPNG, as we used to call it, and who want to promote the use and deployment of V6. And one of the challenges with IPv6 deployment is you go to most enterprises, and many of them are going to kind of scratch their heads and say, oh yeah, I have an answer, I disable it. So, which is not necessarily the answer that we want to hear. For those of you who understand the importance of adoption, especially in the service provider community, you understand that the task force goals, although originally centralized around the service provider environment, is now switching to the enterprise environment. So we're trying to change that idea of just disabling. And of course, many of the vendors that are manufacturing products today are now ensuring that they're IPv6 ready through the IPv6 forum. So the advocacy goal is to make sure that we're talking to each of the leaders in our relative markets. So we have here in the Bay, we have Ed kind of concentrating on the Bay Area. I'm up in Sacramento, pressing the button on the state of California and other private sector entities in that area. I've also pushed into Nevada as well, northern Nevada. We are also pushing into the Pacific Northwest as well, and Yuri, who I know is floating around here somewhere. He's having a coffee in the back room over there. Yuri is also active with our task force and is trying to lead the efforts for a Pacific Northwest entity up in Washington and Seattle, and he'll be organized under our entity once we get our nonprofit status. Educating is the other goal. That is one of the things that we put on the list for some time ago, which is certification of engineers, IPv6 ready programs for products. Our main focus is to get the message out to engineers that want to learn about IPv6 and to offer them certifications, if we can, at no cost, at least at the basic level, as these classes do cost time and money. But the idea is to make sure that they're aware of these programs and to also give them the resources and information and tools that they'll need to be successful with IPv6. And this rolls into the certification objective. So the certification objective is to make sure that everyone that joins our task force, either as a member or even if you're not a member, we want you to have that opportunity to understand what those certification paths are. So as we educate and bring you up to speed, then we take you into the certification path. And so those two goals somewhat go hand in hand, but we do see them a little bit as separately, because there really are no certifications for like project managers on how to be successful with an IPv6 deployment. This was a discussion that I had with Scott over in Rocky Mountain about what a challenge it is for folks that are in charge of IPv6 deployment projects to have those discussions with executives so executive sponsorship can be obtained for a migration is the most difficult thing to do. And so on the education and certification side, when we start educating folks on IPv6, it's not just about the technical certification, it's also about educating them and building, possibly in the future, a certification for a project manager to deploy. So this is one of the things in our future vision, is to be able to offer that. That way, when project managers go to bat, they can align scope, schedule, resource, and be successful. So it's not just technically focused anymore. We have to think about function within the organization and building the proper charters on the project side. And last but not least is the deployment goal. So deploying IPv6. We're in the process of setting goals for converting organizations, measurable goals that are sensible for the organizations that we're talking to. And when we first started Advocacy, we didn't really have goals. It was just, hey, let's go advocate, talk to people about it, and maybe we'll do it. Well, now that IPv6 is becoming more of a reality for many enterprises and service providers. Service providers are already there for the most part, but on the enterprise side, to be able to go to a state entity, for example, or a county and focus on them and then actually convert them and have them use IPv6, I can measure that as a complete target, that I've completed that goal. So we'll be setting deployment goals on a regional basis in both private and public sector. Since we've had success with the state of California, we'll see if we can also set some county goals as well throughout California and into Nevada, Oregon, and Washington as well. And of course, in the deployment process, making sure that we have the right tools and expertise is a big part of the equation as well. And thanks to many of the vendors that are out there, many of them have a lot of those resources, but when the rubber meets the road and we start getting beyond the technical, this is where the vendors really don't necessarily understand the business. So this is where the project managers that work for those organizations need to be able to step in and take over where the vendors don't understand the business, the project management teams and PMOs, project management offices do. So deployment is going to become critical in the future around that chain of command from the technical team to the project team, and then into sponsorship, executive sponsorship, and then all the way up to the C-level in the enterprise side. So, and that's where we see the task force focusing a lot of our efforts. So let's answer the question, especially for those of you that wonder, how does NAv6TF fit in? How does IPv6 Forum fit in? What are these other entities? This is a list, a logoed list of all of the entities. And I'm going to go through the list here in a second, but generally how we're really organized, the North American IPv6 Task Force is really more of a splash entity that all the sub-task force network in. So think of it as each of these task forces that you see here, Rocky Mountain, thank you, Mr. Saw, California, et cetera. Fortunately, I have a booming voice, so hopefully it won't last too long. We all are operating on our own, and right now, Rocky Mountain and California are the only task forces that actually have or are pursuing a nonprofit status entity as a private organization, 501c3, and that's essentially where we're headed as well. We actually have our bylaws, ramped that up, elected our board members, et cetera, and of course, wouldn't have been able to do that without the other task forces as well. So in terms of our organization, each of these task forces have a group of individuals that are advocating IPv6. And so what we're hoping for over the course of the next year or two is that we're more consistent across the board within the task force entities in terms of understanding what our goals are, what our missions are, because depending upon region, the missions may be a little bit different. I'll give you a moment to look at the logos while the noise continues. All right, here we go. Let's get through this quickly. There are 9 task force regions. Here are some of the URL entities. Some of them are well kept. Some of them are not, just because we're all volunteers. So, and one of the things that we are trying to do is make sure that the sites are integrated, at least in their news feeds or in their posts. And that's something, thanks to Ed Horley and his work with WordPress, that we've been able to do. So special thanks to Ed for that. He worked really hard to ramp those up. But these regions, the goal of each of these regions will have individual goals based on their regions and where they're at, especially on the enterprise side. And right now, actually, Ed and I are managing the NAv6TF site to aggregate all of the task force information and events that are occurring throughout the North American area. So we're going to close with accomplishments real quick here. We did successfully advocate to the California Technology Agency, which has had like 3 or 4 different names since then. The state likes to change names of entities a lot. And the California Department of Homeland Security, which used to be the Office of Emergency Services. We ramped up special interest groups, et cetera. And the California Technology Agency, otherwise known as CTA, is actually deploying IPv6 right now. And actually, my company does a lot of security assessments, my company is SAC and we actually are assessing the entire state of California's security right now, and we had an interesting experience because their engineers came in and said, where's IPv6 in scope in this, because we're deploying it this year. And the people in procurement said, well, it's not, because we didn't get it in there. So by next year, we'll actually be assessing security for the state of California on the IPv6 side, because they are deploying. We opened actually a data center some time ago. We named as MetroNet 6 for first responders. That was originally part of the Moon v6 network. We connected it to Moon v6. which is now Bound v6 is the new entity. So that Metronet 6 lab is still present. We still have that data center. First responders had an opportunity to do some testing. They did their testing, and right now it's just sitting idle. So the space is sitting idle. We have a couple of routers in there, nothing fancy. But it really was focused around the first responders and public agencies. We also contributed to published papers and studies for Northcom and NPS, and conducted events such as this. And finally, we've done some feedback for some of the firewall vendors that are headquartered here in the Bay. And we formed the Notforprofit status this year, the bylaws, as I mentioned before. Before I get buzzed out completely, membership, it's free. Doesn't cost you anything. And we're driving our membership through GoGo6 and the gogoNET community. So you can either send me an email or sign up for GoGo6. Bruce will mention that, I'm sure, at closing as well, how to do that. And then one of the benefits of being a member is that you get to be involved in this event, and your registration fees, we can discount those a little bit. And at least have an opportunity to attend other events at a discounted rate as well, because these things do cost money. So that's all I have. I have some acknowledgments. Thanks to the team that has supported us over the years. Some are new, some are emeritus status, but all of you, we appreciate you. If I don't have your name listed here, it's not because I've forgotten you, it's just because you can only fit so much on one page. So thanks so much. And if you have any questions, you can come see me. I'll be here throughout the late morning.